if everyone could go on mute. If you have a question, feel free to put it in the chat or raise your hand, but there will be time at the end to ask some questions if you have any questions. I'm going to get started in the interest of time. So what we're going to be talking about today is the Census 2021, and we're going to be talking about population data. So what is the census? It happens every 10 years. I hope all of you received kind of a survey in the post at some point last year and filled it out, and it gives us a picture of all the people and households in England and Wales. And the data that we get from it can help organisations such as ourselves make decisions on planning and funding public services in our area, including transport, education, healthcare. The census is a really good way of giving us a population level understanding. It also enables us to compare to other places and the national average. I just saw a few people come in, just to let you know that we're recording the session. Please let me know if you have any worries or you wouldn't like it to be recorded. Thank you. Because the census, the ONS this year is kind of providing data in different ways to make it more accessible. Yes, the slides will be available afterwards as well. In more accessible ways. They are drip feeding the results to allow people time to kind of analyse them and look at them in interesting ways. So this is the first webinar in a series. I'm going to be doing 4 of these webinars. And this first one is based on population, which is the first release of data that they have provided. So what do we mean by population data? It's really around demography and migration of the population, including things like age, sex, country of birth, household composition, deprivation and size, things like migration, both from within the UK, but from outside the UK inside, population density, legal partnership status. Other things around population, for example, around ethnicity is coming up later, so we haven't got that information just yet, but that is coming at some point. I'm not going to cover all of those indicators that I mentioned today. I'm just going to touch on some of the key findings from some of these, but I'll also be talking through the census map, which is an interactive tool with you all, so you can explore what is of interest to you in your own time as well. So hopefully I'll give you the tools to be able to kind of explore some of the information on your own. So what are we finding in Somerset? We've got a population of over 500,000 people, and almost a third of those people live in South Somerset, so around 30% live in South Somerset, and the least populated area is in Mendip, where around 20% of people are living. This may not be a surprise, but our population is ageing. So we've got around a quarter of our population is 65 and over, compared to the national average of around 18.4%. So we've got a higher than average proportion of people who are 65 plus. But an average can only tell you so much. It hides quite a lot of information, and we've got real variation across Somerset around age. We've got some people who are living in some areas of Bridgewater, for example, where only 15% of people are age 65 plus, whereas Minehead and Outer Portlock, which this image is showing, has almost 40% of people in that age group. So it's a real mix, and for us to say 25% of people who are living in Somerset 65 plus, it hides a lot. So we really need to focus on the different areas and think about what those areas look like. So kind of what's going on here, it's not the aging population isn't a Somerset only thing, it's an England wide thing, and this graph shows the percentage growth in the different age groups from the last census, which was 10 years ago, to now. So what we can see here is the orange lines are England, and you can see that the growth in 65 plus has been 20%, which is significantly higher than children and young people and those of working age. So ageing population, not just a Somerset thing, but what we are seeing in Somerset is that our population of 65 plus is growing faster than in England. So all of the blue bars are the different parts of Somerset, and each of those are higher for 65 plus than England average. So there's a couple of reasons why that is. Somerset's beautiful. It's a lovely place to retire. A lot of people coming here to kind of retire and relax. But also what we're seeing is that for some of the age groups, the percentage growth is a lot lower than England average. So for example, in Mendip, we've only got 1% growth in children under 15 and only 1% growth in the working age, 15 to 64. So we're seeing like a lot of people move to Somerset to retire, but also we're not seeing a lot of people have families here or stay like for working age. But what I would say again is like that's not across the whole of Somerset. As you can see for Somerset, West and Taunton and Sedgemoor, the percentage growth for those two age groups are very similar to England. It's more in Mendip and South Somerset where we're seeing lower than kind of England average percentages in growth. And I think what I wanted to highlight was that it really is different by different locations. So these are areas of Somerset, they're middle super output areas, which is a definition that the ONS used, and they're parts of towns and rural areas. So what I'm looking at here is the blue ones are those with the highest proportion, with the lowest proportion of 65 plus, and the green ones are the highest proportion of 65 plus. And what you can see with the blue ones, they're all towns, they're all kind of urban centres. So those urban areas, Bridgewater, Yeovil, Taunton, they have a lower proportion of people who are age 65 plus. And what we're seeing is those with the highest proportions of 65 plus people are those in the more kind of rural areas. As I mentioned earlier, Minehead, Outer and Portlock, you're seeing like almost 40% of people who live there are 65 plus. So again, age depends on location as well. It's not just, we can't just assume that, you know, across the board 25% of people are 65 plus. It depends on where people are living as to the age distribution. Something else to think about in terms of households is the number of people in the households. So around a third of households in Somerset have only one person living there. That's pretty much exactly the same as what it is England-wide. So we see that across the whole of England, that around 30% of people live on their own. What's really interesting here, though, is that we see some areas of urban centres where we see really high proportions of people living on their own. So for example, Taunton Wilton, it's almost 50% of people are living on their own there. And in Yeovil Town as well, around 40% of people living on their own. Again, if we look at that in terms of the top 5 and the bottom 5 in terms of those that live on their own, the top 5 they're the lowest proportion of people who live on their own. So they tend to be a bit more rural areas. And actually there's a high proportion of people who are in single family households. What we mean by single family household is that it's a single family unit that lives there. So it could be a couple with children, a couple with non-dependent children, so people who are older than 18. A multiple family household is when you combine more than one family unit. So that could be, for example, if you live with your grandparents, or if you have more than one family living together. So what we see here is that one person households, the lowest are kind of in more rural areas, and the highest again are in more towns and urban areas. So Taunton's coming up again, and Yeovil and Wells. As I mentioned earlier, we saw that fewer 65 plus are living in towns. So I think it's not surprising that those who are 65 plus and living alone are in more rural areas. So for example, there's around 64% of one person households in Minehead and Outer Portlock where people are age 65 plus. So a very high proportion of those one person households in that area are people who are old. And we kind of find the inverse in towns. So people who are living on their own in towns tend to be more of working age. So it's those who are 16 to 64 and they're living on their own in the centre of town, often in flats. Something else we wanted to look at was households who have dependent children. So around a quarter of households in Somerset have children who are dependent on their parents or carers. And this is a bit lower than the England average. So England average is around 28%. And again, it kind of changes depending on location. So in some more urban areas, that is higher. So Frome South and East, for example, has almost a third of households with dependent children, and Bridgewater North as well is very similar. So again, I wouldn't say it's that surprising that in Somerset we have a slightly smaller proportion of households with dependent children, given the fact that we have quite a high proportion of people who are older and are less likely to have dependent children at home. So it's kind of a not surprising statistic. And then we also looked at deprivation and how that varies across the county. In the census, they look at deprivation in terms of 4 different dimensions, and those are education, employment, health, and housing. So a household is defined as deprived in the education dimension if no one has at least a level 2 education, which is around GCSE level. Employment is classified as deprived in if there's no full-time student, or either there's someone unemployed or disabled in the household. Health is classified as deprived in the health dimension if a member is disabled, and housing is classified as deprived is if the accommodation is either overcrowded, in a shared dwelling, or has no central heating. So the statistics here of 2 to 3% of households in Somerset are deprived in 3 dimensions. So that's they will be deprived in at least 3 of those: education, health, housing, or employment. So across the board, 2 to 3% is very low across the whole of Somerset as an average. But I think what's really, really important to highlight here is that some areas in Somerset have really high rates of 3 or more dimensions of deprivation. So for example, in one neighbourhood in Bridgewater, we're seeing that as 23% of people who live there have at least 3 of those dimensions of deprivation. And in Highbridge, there's around 20% in one area. So 2 to 3% across Somerset really hides some really specific areas that have got more levels of deprivation than others. So it's really important to think about, 2 to 3% doesn't sound that bad, but when you look more deeper into the data, there are areas that we could be focusing on in terms of deprivation and the different types of deprivation, importantly. I'm now going to move on and talk to you a bit more about the census map and how you can use it, and then talk about what all this means for our work. So what's really great about the census this time is they've put it into a really interesting interactive tool which anyone can use. It's kind of on their website, and you can just follow the link and go into detail about where people are with particular characteristics. You can click on the link and just zoom in and out and click on the different indicators and find out what you're interested in and explore it a bit more, which I'm going to show some examples of in a minute. And I just wanted to highlight how you might use the census map to find insight. So there's, I guess, 2 major ways of finding insight. You can start off with quite a broad topic and then narrow down the question and look at specific data. For example, some of you might be interested in children in Somerset or women, and you can use the census to look at those questions in a bit more detail, look at more specific data. So for example, tell me about children in Mendip, or what about women aged 16 to 34 in Highbridge. So really like being more specific about the question that you're asking and what you're interested in. You can also use it as part of a tool of looking at other data as well. So you could look at a broad array of data, not just the census on its own, but you can use it alongside the active lives survey or health data to think about what's the story. You consider all these different parts and all these different data sets, and when you consider all of them together, what does it tell you about a place or a population, and what story can we start to tell about that place or that population, and then how can we use that story to do something about it. So now I'm going to show you the census map and we'll explore it a bit together. So the first thing we're going to look at is children in Somerset. So we're going to have a look at tell me about children in Mendip. So I am going to share my screen with the census map on it. So here is the census map, and if you zoom all the way out, you can see England and all the different parts of England. And if we clicked on age, for example, you can see how the different colours show different percentages of people who, in this case, are children who are aged 15 years and under. And you can zoom into any area. So we're going to come over and we're going to zoom into Somerset. So you can look at Somerset by local authority districts, and then as you get closer, you can get into more detail about the middle layer super output areas and output areas. But what was our question? It was about children in Mendip. So what we're going to do is we're going to zoom over and look at children in Mendip. So as you can see here, the lighter colour, the lighter green, shows you that fewer percentage of people who live in those areas are 15 years and under, so around 14–15%. As you get to blue, it's a higher percentage of children who live in those areas. So we're seeing around Street, Glastonbury West, it's high proportion. But what you can see here is that the darkest area is over in Frome. So what's going on in Frome? We can zoom right in and we can see that, okay, around 20% of children in Frome Northwest are 20% of people who live in Frome Northwest are children, 21.6% in Frome South and East are children. So that's an interesting thing in itself. But now, why don't we have a think about, okay, what kind of places are those children living in and what kind of households are they living in? So we can click over here and look at household composition. So single family households. So what you can now see is that a lot of the single family households are actually living on the outskirts of Frome. So the darker areas are the higher proportion of single family households. So what we're seeing here, Critchhill, there's a lot of single family households. Down here, up here in Berkeley Down and Stonebridge, there's a lot more single family households. And that makes us then think about, okay, where are these children living and what are their needs and how, for example, this might relate to active travel, for example. So the children living up here, how far away are they from their school? How can they get to their school? How can they get there using active travel? What might we want to think about when we're thinking about those things? Or it might be, for example, we might know that the leisure centre's up over here, but what about the children over here? How can they get to the leisure centre safely? And what other services might they have near them that they would access, for example, a park? So it's really thinking about those children and young people, where they live and what access they've got to things. Another thing you can look at, which I mentioned earlier, is household deprivation. So households that are deprived in 3 dimensions. As you can see in Frome, quite a lot are close to the kind of Somerset-wide average of 2–3% that we mentioned earlier, but actually there are some areas that are higher than that. So we're seeing here, and this household deprivation is one of the indicators that you can get to quite a granular level. So you can really focus in at this particular area of Frome, 10% of people are deprived in 3 dimensions, and actually over here it's up to 15%. So again, it's thinking about, okay, those children that live there, what is it about that area that means that they are more likely to be deprived? Is there certain things that we could put on there that would support them? Is it related to health deprivation? Is it related to housing? What can we do about that, and how can we focus our efforts on those areas? So I think what is really great about the data visualization in terms of a map is you can really zoom into the different areas and really think about what the different areas mean for different types of people that live there. What I'm going to look at next is the area of Minehead and Outer. So you can just type in here what you would like to search for, and here we'll look at Minehead and Outer Pull, because as we mentioned before, and as I'll show you here, there's a very high proportion of people who live there who are aged 65 and over. I think what is striking already from just looking at this without even going a bit deeper in is that you can see that it's a very rural area. Minehead itself, Minehead town, is a different output area, so it's kind of contained in itself, and then this area is so big and vast and very rural. So it's again thinking about, okay, so we've got a high proportion of people aged 65 years and over. What's going on with these people? What kind of, for example, deprivation might they be facing? So again, let's have a look at deprivation in 3 dimensions. And actually what we're finding is in a lot of the areas, it's not that dissimilar to the average for Somerset. We're seeing that, it's 1–2%. There's, as you get closer to some of the urban areas, you can see that it gets a little bit higher. And again, as you get closer to Minehead, you can see some higher figures. And so again, it will be thinking about, okay, those people who are 65 plus and those that are in those more deprived areas, what support might they need and what can they get from us to help with that? Again, you can think about things like number of people in the household. So as you can see here, quite a lot of people who are living out. Only around 20% who have one person household, but when you go into Portlaw, 55% are living on their own, which is very high proportion. And think about how many of those are 65 plus and maybe are socially isolated. So thinking about a lot of those things and how you can focus your work, it's really useful tool. I think the census map is to kind of delving a bit deeper into particular areas and particular areas of interest. As I said before, at the moment, all they've got is the population statistics, which are down here. So age, country of birth, household, composition, deprivation size, legal partnership status, living arrangements, population density, sex. But as they release more data, they're going to add more things on here. So as we go through the webinars in the future and we get more data, for example, on health and housing, all of those things will start to come on here and we can explore in more detail as well. So this is just the start, is I guess what I wanted to highlight. I'm just going to go back to the So I think what's really important is to think about how the census can support our work and how does it relate to the work that we're doing in Somerset. So the important thing for the census is that it helps us understand the context that we're working in. So it really helps us understand, we may think we know who needs our help most, but the census data adds context and data behind those thoughts. And it shows us the population demographics and where those are. And it can also help us think about where we want to go to talk to people and find out what's going on for them and in those areas. It also adds context to the findings we get from the Active Life survey. So obviously here at SASP, we're really interested in physical activity, and something that this helps us with is thinking about inactivity levels across the different local authorities in Somerset, but there might be population level differences that are driving those. For example, there might be a higher proportion of people in Sedgemoor who are inactive, but there might also be greater numbers of older people there, and that might be likely to be more inactive. We can also use the census information to help us plan services that we provide to those who need them the most. For example, we can use it to find those who are more at risk of particular types of deprivation or those who are further away from particular facilities or needs, and think about how we can then focus our efforts on those particular places and kind of work together and not in isolation to help support those people. As some of you know, I've done a couple of webinars on the Active Life survey, so I wanted to just quickly show you how you can link some of the findings from the Active Life survey to the census data and it help us contextualize it. Some of the key findings, and these aren't all of the findings, but some of the top ones we found were that Sedgemoor was the least active area in Somerset. Over a third of adults in the lowest socioeconomic group are inactive, which is a lot higher than those in the highest socioeconomic group, and that 16 to 34-year-olds are no longer the most active group. And where the census can help us here is it can help us think about, okay, what's going on in Sedgemoor that might be driving this? Let's have a look at the data, let's have a look at the map and explore, is it an older population? Are they more isolated? Is there more deprivation in particular areas? So it can really help us think about, okay, why are we seeing that Sedgemoor is the least active area in Somerset, and is it particular parts of Sedgemoor that we need to be focusing on? Over a third of adults in the lower socioeconomic group are inactive, and so it's thinking about where are those people, where do the people in the lower socioeconomic groups live, and that's linked to those deprivation statistics that I showed you and how in so much detail you can get to particular areas. And what might be going on in those places, which means it's more difficult to be active. Once you can see where the place is, you can then explore about what is in that place. So for example, distance to school, distance to leisure centres, access to green space, all of those things you can start to explore a bit more when you actually know where they are. And then thinking about 16 to 34-year-olds, where are they? As I mentioned before, a lot of them are in towns and our urban centres. A lot of them are living on their own. What level of deprivations are these young people facing? What barriers are they facing to being active? And are those related to where they are living and who they are living with or not living with? And so it really helps add context to some of the findings that we're getting from the Active Lives survey. I think something to highlight here is that at the moment, the Active Lives survey, we can only get to local authority level. They are going to be doing small area estimates, which will map quite nicely onto the data that I was just showing you about the more detail, and they're going to be coming in the next 6 months or so we'll be able to get more detail on that, but at the moment we've only got the local authority level for the Active Lives survey. I think finally what's next to say is that we've got 3 more webinars coming up. We've got so much more data coming, and this is just the start. It's just the pure basics around population and population demographics. The next one in December will have data on the labour market and travel to work. In January we'll have more around housing and education, and then in February we'll also have more on health, disability and unpaid care. So I think the next 3 are definitely more focused data sets. This one at the moment is just kind of population wide in Somerset, but these ones will be more focused on different areas of work that perhaps some of you are working in that would be of interest. So please do sign up if you're interested in any of those areas. I'm going to pause now. We've got about 10 minutes or so for if anyone's got any thoughts or any questions or anything they would like to talk about or share about what I've been saying so far. Thank you.
I was going to say Sheila's busy typing, but she's just put really useful resource. I thought was a question that might be easier said rather than typing away. So, I'm interested in the next lot of data sets because we'll be able to layer all of that on top of the population, which I think will be really interesting. You know, and there's a few faces that I see on the call that I think, wow, you know, so Sophie, when we're working in West Somerset, you know, that'll be really interesting to look at some of that alongside some of the health data. And you talked about linking the Active Lives stuff, but linking some of the data that you have, Sophie, from primary care might be really interesting too. Because you've got an awful lot.
It's fascinating. I only saw this on social media last night, and when I saw the link for it I was like, yeah, that's definitely something I'm going to be interested and involved in. And yeah, I think from the work we've been doing already, Jane, I think this can link in really well. Yeah, I think it's going to be a really great resource, so thanks ever so much for sharing, Annabelle. Really good.
You're welcome.
Sophie has practice like PCN practice data, so amalgamated practice data on all sorts of things. I mean, it's a huge data set that you have, and Annabelle, I'd be really interested to know how that then links, or whether it needs to, across our geography, because that's what it doesn't give you, isn't it?
Yeah. So, yeah. Catherine, you've got your hand up. Oh, you've gone on mute.
Is that working?
Yes.
Sorry, my IT is not working well today. I just wanted to know around I don't know if you've looked into much around the migrant aspects of the population. I don't know if you've had a chance to have a look at it, but we're aware that anybody who intended to live here or lives here for over 3 months had the opportunity to complete the census. But some of the figures that are coming out are showing, for example, in Sedgemoor, where we know a lot of people working at Hinckley are migrants. It's coming out kind of around the national average, and that's quite unexpected, I guess. And I just don't know, because the other issue is that the ONS don't class you as a migrant until you've been here for 12 months. So we're just wondering if there's kind of a gap, and whether you know any more about that, or where we can find out that information. What's going on?
What I know about the census is that they asked if you moved in the last 12 months, and it's moved within the UK or moved from outside of the UK in. Right. But I guess what we don't know about that is if someone moved kind of around the corner, if that makes sense. They could have still lived in the same area, and they've just moved like a couple of streets around the corner, and it is around in the last 12 months rather than yeah, more detailed than that. I don't know, I can have a little explore actually to see if they've got any more detailed data on it, but they are the statistics that you'll find on the map. It's
I'll
like
have a look at the map.
yeah, so it's in the last 12 months and it's from within the UK. So again, you don't know if they've moved from London, say, or they've moved into Somerset, if that makes sense. They might have just moved within Somerset, which to some extent is not as helpful, I suppose.
No.
Particularly for your point around Hinkley Point, I think.
Yeah, and also you don't know, whether people would have understood to complete it and things like that. So there's a whole load of other layers, aren't there? So I guess language and those sorts of things we need to look at as well.
Yeah,
okay.
Because I think that's something that I was thinking. So I live in Frome and I am one of the people that moved in the last 12 months. When I did the census, I'd moved in the last 12 months. And it felt at the time that so many people were moving into Frome, but I didn't see that in the data either. So again, it might be that it was the way the question was worded, or when actually people move, like the timing of it, and things like that. Because again, because they only do it every 10 years, it only captures a very small part of time where people are moving.
Yes.
It's migrating, unfortunately, but yeah.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
It's okay. Stuart, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, just on that same point, I've been looking recently at local data in terms of country of birth. It's just around vaccination issues, particularly because we've got a lot of vaccine hesitancy in what's termed white other, which is primarily East European populations. So not actually relevant to this audience, but so the country of birth might be a better data set to look at rather than movements in the last 12 months.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And country of birth is on there, so it's something you can definitely explore and have a look at.
Thank you.
Anyone else have any thoughts or questions that they'd like to ask?
Can I ask another one? What level is it? It's at middle super output area, but you can focus in. So I'm doing some work with parish councils, and they'll want to look at the population of their parish. Does it come? Is there data at a parish level, or will it be?
Yeah, so the closest one you can get is output area, which I'm not sure exactly how that aligns with parish, but it'll probably be very similar to parish level actually. But what I would say is not every indicator is at that level. So some are more detailed than others. So I think household deprivation is at that level, for example, but age, you can't get down to that level. So age is only at middle super output area. And it will depend basically on, they basically don't want to be able to identify individuals, and so it's just a kind of sampling and data thing as to why they wouldn't go down to that level in certain indicators. Because for example, with age, if you download the data, you can get the exact number of people per age, so you can get the number of 21-year-olds, 22-year-olds, you can get it actually at that level. So they wouldn't want to do that too granular level, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
particularly if you've got villages, there might be only one 5-year-old, for example, in a village.
Thank you.
So yeah, it depends on the data that you would want to see, but some do have it at output level, which is basically a couple of streets in general. It's very detailed.
Okay, thank you.
Right. Anyone else have any thoughts, questions?
I think it's just worth commenting again on how useful the mapping is on this, because I think it's the first time we've had this with census data, isn't it? And
it is.
But, when you're working on a place basis, it's really powerful to be able to look in that granular detail. Could really help shape some very localized interventions, as you say, working with other data sets as well.
Yeah, I would say I'm so glad that they've done it this year. It's the first time they've done it, and I think it's a really great way of exploring data in a really accessible way, but especially when we're working in a particular place, that you can really zoom in and focus on areas that you're interested in. And I'm just looking forward to them adding even more data now. That's the main thing. Well, thank you very much everyone for joining. The recording will be sent out to everyone, and feel free to share it with any of your colleagues. I'm also going to put it, we're going to put it on YouTube and put it on our website. I shared the link to the maps in the chat, but I will also share the slides, which has the link to the maps, has my contact details and all of those things if you do want to get in contact with me if you've got any questions. And do please join if you're interested in any of the future ones. We can explore some of those data sets in a bit more detail as well and see what's going on in Somerset. So thank you for joining, everyone. It's nice to see you all.
Thanks very much.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.